From the moment Nuka-Cola trickled into American grocery stores in 2042, introduced as a brightly colored carbonated curiosity by chemist John Caleb Bradburton, the beverage rapidly evolved into far more than a sugary drink. It became a cultural monument that shaped the identity of pre-war America and stood as a symbol of progress, optimism, and relentless corporate ambition. Bradburton's original goal had been simple enough: create a soft drink that tasted better, lasted longer, and delivered a more satisfying sweetness than Sunset, Sarsaparilla, or any other competitor. But in pursuing that vision, he unlocked a formula that captured the imagination of a nation that was already slipping towards social, political, and economic turbulence. Nuka-Cola was refreshing, yes, but more importantly, it was consistent, bright, cheerful, and aggressively marketed, offering a counterweight to the rising fears of international instability and resource shortages. Bradburton's genius lay not only in chemistry, but in understanding this emerging cultural need. The drink became a lifestyle, and he understood early that if he wanted Nuka-Cola to survive in a world dominated by ever more powerful corporations, he had to build an identity that reached far beyond a simple beverage. To accomplish this, he assembled a board of executives and a marketing brain trust who embraced the belief that Nuka-Cola could become something approaching a national ideology, using targeted advertisements, whimsical mascots, and carefully crafted slogans to appeal to every demographic, from suburban housewives to steelworkers in the industrial heartland. By the early 2050 seconds, Nuka-Cola was unstoppable, outselling every competing beverage and positioning itself as the single most recognized consumer brand in the United States, a position that brought both opportunity and inevitable tension as other corporations began either seeking partnerships or launching sabotage campaigns disguised as market competition. Bradburton, undeterred, envisioned something greater than national sales dominance. He wanted Nuka-Cola to become a physical experience, a monumental installation that families could visit, a place where the optimism and sugar-coated patriotism of the brand could be manifested in physical form and further cement the company's dominance long into the future. It was this ambition, part corporate strategy, part personal legacy project, that sparked the earliest discussions of Nuka-World, a concept he pitched to his board not as a theme park but as an empire of joy, a controlled environment where every sight, sound, smell, and sensation reinforced the supremacy of Nuka-Cola and deepened consumer loyalty in ways no advertisement ever could. At a time when American corporations were expanding their power into areas previously reserved for governments, Nuka-Cola was determined not to be left behind. The creation of Nuka-World was not simply about entertainment, but about controlling cultural narratives, shaping public preference, and ensuring that future generations associated their happiest memories with the brand. Bradburton's board initially balked at the extreme costs, acquiring land in the Commonwealth region, developing cutting-edge robotics to operate attractions, contracting militarized security units to protect the investment from increasing domestic unrest. But the sheer force of Bradburton's personality and the unshakable profitability of the brand silenced most dissent. The company had already proven it could outmarket, outproduce, and out-invent its rivals. With the American workforce stretching thin and the nation stumbling toward global conflict, Nuka-Cola's decision to build a paradise of escapism seemed almost patriotic, and the government, eager for anything that increased national morale, often supported their expansions through favorable regulations and discreet political pressure. Behind the scenes, Nuka-Cola's research division was undergoing rapid militarization, with Project Cobalt and other classified initiatives transforming the corporation into a dual-natured entity, one part entertainment titan, one part weapons contractor. This duality became a quiet pillar of the company's vision for Nuka-World. Bradburton wanted a park that dazzled visitors and reinforced the company's wholesome public image, while the board saw an opportunity for something more complex. An enormous testing ground, where consumer behavior could be monitored and advanced technology, from robotics to biological research, could be studied discreetly under the mask of family entertainment. This dynamic created the corporate culture that defined Nuka-Cola in the years leading up to the park's construction: outwardly cheerful, inwardly ruthless, obsessed with expansion, scientific advancement, and brand survival at any cost. By 2060, Nuka-Cola's dominance was so absolute that the company's executives openly spoke about the inevitability of Nuka-World, presenting it as a natural extension of a brand beloved by virtually every household in America. Their marketing division projected that the park would not only pay for itself within 5 years, but would double national demand for Nuka-Cola products. More importantly, visitors would be immersed in a setting where every visual cue reinforced the brand's supremacy. Every trash can painted Nuka red, every building shaped like a bottle or cap, every jingle designed to embed itself into the subconscious. Bradburton viewed these innovations as harmless psychological flourishes meant to delight guests. Others on the board saw them as the next frontier in consumer control. By 2067, as global tensions escalated and the nation strained under resource shortages and militarization, Nuka-Cola executives doubled down on the fantasy that Nuka-World could serve as a place where Americans could momentarily forget the grim reality of the world outside. This was the environment in which Nuka-World was truly born, not merely from whimsy or creativity, but from a perfect storm of corporate ambition, cultural dependence, and pre-war anxiety that made escapism a commodity as valuable as weapons or fuel. Bradburton believed the park would cement Nuka-Cola as a permanent part of America's identity. The board believed it would guarantee corporate survival even in the event of global conflict, ensuring that no matter what calamities befell the nation, the brand's legacy would endure. The idea of Nuka-World was thus forged in a crucible of national uncertainty, crafted by a man seeking immortality and a corporation seeking dominance, built upon a foundation of public adoration and private experimentation, and destined to become one of the most iconic, dangerous, and enigmatic landmarks in the world that rose from the ashes of the Great War. From the moment the Nuka-Cola Corporation's board agreed to move forward with John Caleb Bradburton's grandest ambition, the construction of Nuka-World became one of the most complex and expensive civilian megaprojects undertaken in pre-war America, requiring a level of planning, political maneuvering, engineering expertise, and corporate secrecy that rivaled military operations of the era. The earliest stages began internally in 2058, when Bradburton commissioned a series of conceptual studies that would define the thematic identity of the park. He imagined a place where American families could briefly escape the rising tensions of the worldwide resource crisis, immersing themselves in a saccharine fantasy that reinforced national confidence, consumer loyalty, and the illusion that the American dream was still intact. To turn that vision into reality, Nuka-Cola assembled an unprecedented consortium of architects, robotics engineers, civil contractors, economists, entertainment, designers, and R&D specialists, many of whom had backgrounds in military tech or government infrastructure due to the scarcity of civilian engineering talent in the mid-century years. The park's projected footprint required acquiring an enormous portion of land in the region that would later become part of the Commonwealth, a controversial move that forced Nuka-Cola to negotiate with local governments, eminent domain boards, and private landowners, while deploying legal teams to fast-track zoning changes and environmental impact studies that would normally take years to resolve. Records uncovered centuries later show that Nuka-Cola did not hesitate to use its influence to expedite the process, offering political favors, lucrative construction contracts, and quiet campaign donations to secure state-level approval, while ensuring any public resistance was minimized through relentless advertising that painted the proposed park as a symbol of hope during increasingly uncertain times. Once the land was secured, Bradburton initiated a closed-door series of design summits in which he outlined the thematic zones he wanted. Each area needed to embody an idealized slice of American culture filtered through the lens of Nuka-Cola's brand identity. Early drafts contained even more zones than those eventually built, including a proposed underwater pavilion and a towering Nuka Mountain roller coaster that proved too costly and dangerous to develop. What survived the early stages evolved into 6 core lands: Nuka Town, USA, Kiddie Kingdom, the Galactic Zone, Safari Adventure, Dry Rock, Gulch, and the World of Refreshment, each requiring its own architectural teams, robotics systems, power grids, and bespoke entertainment technologies. At the same time, Nuka-Cola's leadership realized that if the park was to function as both a public destination and a private research ground, it needed layered infrastructure, the visible surface-level attractions designed to delight millions annually, and the hidden network of labs, tunnels, security corridors, and observation chambers built underneath or behind the public facade. This dual purpose shaped nearly every stage of the planning process. Civil engineers designed utility grids that disguised high-voltage conduits intended for experimental robotics. Structural teams crafted walls and service buildings with reinforced materials capable of containing hazardous research incidents. Even the cheerful mascot animatronics, designed by the esteemed Robco engineers contracted specifically for the park, contained modular components enabling them to be repurposed for security or data collection if needed. Funding for the project quickly exceeded initial projections, ballooning beyond what any single corporation could sustain without either collapsing or accepting outside influence. But the Nuka-Cola Corporation, bolstered by unprecedented wartime sales and its increasingly lucrative defense-related research, was able to secure federal tax exemptions, accelerated bonds, and covert government grants disguised as public morale investments. Many of these funds came from agencies interested in the park's potential as a testing ground for crowd psychology, robotic labor, and controlled urban simulations, though such interests were never disclosed to the public. Bradburton resisted any attempts by the government to exert direct control over the park, but strategically allowed restricted cooperation as long as he maintained final authority. Nuka-World would be a corporate monument, not a federal installation. This insistence fed into the meticulousness of the park's planning. Every inch of Nuka-World had to reflect Bradburton's immaculate vision. He insisted on advanced climate control systems to keep guests comfortable regardless of weather, pneumatic waste disposal networks to preserve the illusion of cleanliness, and state-of-the-art transportation, including the now iconic Nuka Express monorail that would ferry visitors from nearby transit hubs into the heart of the park. Behind the scenes, planners developed redundancies that bordered on paranoia: backup power grids to prevent blackouts, sealed panic chambers disguised as staff areas, fail-safe protocols for malfunctioning robots, and storage facilities designed to hold dangerous Nuka-Cola flavors or compounds that were still undergoing experimental refinement. As the project moved into the 2060 seconds, the American public became captivated by rumors and teasers released through controlled marketing campaigns. Early advertisements depicted smiling families, towering Nuka-Cola mascots, and a utopian environment untouched by the anxieties of global tensions, but none revealed the extent of the engineering challenges underway. Nuka-World's planners had to contend with increasing instability in the labor market as military drafts siphoned skilled workers into service. To compensate, the corporation accelerated its partnership with Robco, commissioning a small army of customized Protectrons, Mr. Handy units, and proprietary models to handle construction tasks. These machines not only filled labor gaps, but allowed Nuka-Cola to maintain secrecy in areas of the park where even trusted employees were prohibited, especially near Project Cobalt research zones and subterranean test chambers. Environmental engineering proved equally demanding. The park required enormous water supplies to maintain landscaping, cooling systems, beverage refineries, and decorative features like the quantum-lit rivers of the world of refreshment. To meet these needs, Nuka-Cola diverted multiple regional water lines and constructed a complex internal filtration network. Though publicly marketed as an eco-friendly innovation, private documentation revealed that several filtration systems were intended to handle toxic byproducts from quantum research, deepening the corporation's reliance on clandestine infrastructure. With each passing year, the park grew from blueprints to towering structures. Its iconic skyline, dominated by the towering Nuka-Cola bottles, neon signage, and sprawling attraction zones, beginning to take shape and drawing attention from across the country. But construction came with tragedies. Although Nuka-Cola suppressed most public reports, internal records reveal multiple deaths from robotics malfunctions, structural collapses, and exposure to hazardous materials used by R&D teams that operated parallel to public-facing construction. Bradburton insisted these incidents were statistically insignificant, pushing planners to accelerate development so that Nuka-World could open before escalating global tensions jeopardized tourism entirely. As 2071 approached, the park neared completion, but the planning teams shifted focus toward guest flow management, safety illusions, and psychological engineering. Behavioral researchers mapped walking paths, ensuring every route passed by. High-visibility drink kiosks. Audio teams fine-tuned background music to maximize emotional compliance and encourage consumption. Even the scents pumped into certain areas, like the artificially sweetened air near Nukatown, USA's main plaza, were designed using proprietary olfactory technology intended to stimulate appetite and nostalgia simultaneously. The final years of planning involved intense testing phases. Prototype attractions were run for thousands of hours, robotics routines were stress-tested, and the park's security AI underwent continuous refinement to differentiate between harmless guest behavior and legitimate threats in an environment expected to host upwards of 40,000 visitors a day. Parallel to these preparations, corporate strategists negotiated sponsorship deals, licensing agreements, and long-term supply contracts to ensure the park's financial model would remain profitable even under wartime scarcity. Meanwhile, Bradburton's attention drifted toward his most personal undertaking, Project Cobalt, and the secretive work underway at the Bradburton facility, projects that would later shape the future of both Nuka-World and the man himself. Yet despite these internal complexities, the public face of Nuka-World remained bright and cheerful, a symbol of American innovation and escapism promoted through nationwide campaigns that began in earnest around 2072. By the time the gates were ready to open, the park had already been mythologized, treated not as an entertainment venue but as a national landmark, a promise that no matter what chaos threatened the world beyond its borders, there would remain at least one place where wonder, joy, and sugary excess could thrive untouched. The road to opening day had been paved with secrecy, ambition, government collaboration, and unprecedented engineering triumphs, all woven together into a project that embodied not just the Nuka-Cola Corporation's vision, but the contradictions of pre-war America itself. A society desperate for distraction, willing to overlook the shadows beneath a neon-lit paradise, and eager to embrace a fantasy world even as its own future unraveled. When the gates of Nuka-World finally swung open in the summer of 2072, after more than a decade of unprecedented planning and construction, the event was not merely the launch of an amusement park. It was a meticulously engineered spectacle that cemented the Nuka-Cola Corporation as the uncontested titan of American consumer culture, a corporate empire capable of shaping national identity through sugar, spectacle, and sheer force of branding. Press from every corner of the country descended upon the park days before the grand opening, reporting breathlessly on each new detail revealed during controlled previews. The towering Nuka-Cola bottle structures, the shimmering neon signage, the gleaming monorail that ferried early visitors through sweeping panoramas of the park's themed lands glistening under the sun. John Caleb Bradburton, though increasingly preoccupied with his own secret projects, was front and center for the inaugural unveiling, delivering a celebratory speech coated in patriotic rhetoric about American innovation and the promise of brighter tomorrows despite the world's rising tensions. The United States in 2072 was a nation fraying under economic strain, food shortages, and the looming specter of global conflict. Yet to the millions who gazed upon Nuka-World's debut, all that felt momentarily irrelevant, drowned out by the euphoric bombardment of colors, music, mascots, and the pervasive scent of caramelized sugar drifting through the artificial breezes. Families flocked through the polished plazas in numbers far exceeding projections, their eyes wide at the sight of animatronic greeters designed by Robco engineers who had seamlessly blended consumer service programming with cutting-edge robotics, giving each mascot an uncanny fluidity that blurred the line between machine and cheerful park employee. The first guests experienced attractions that seemed impossibly advanced for civilian entertainment. From the rocket-powered Nuka Galaxy, experience in the Galactic Zone to the meticulously crafted frontier illusions of Dry Rock Gulch, where voice-activated cowboy robots greeted visitors with supernaturally smooth charm. Every ride, game, and interactive display was designed to envelop the participant in an idealized vision of American fun, a world sanitized of hardship and steeped in the hyper-optimism of corporate futurism. Nuka Town, USA, positioned as the park's beating heart, overflowed with themed shops, carnival games, performance stages, and beverage kiosks, offering limited-release Nuka-Cola flavors that were impossible to find anywhere else in the country. The early days of operation saw these flavors, such as Nuka-Cola Twist, Nuka Berry Fizz, and the shockingly popular Nuka Bomb Drop, sell out within hours, fueling scalping markets outside the park and increasing national demand in ways that Nuka-Cola's marketing teams could scarcely believe. But the magic of Nuka-World was not merely the beverages or the rides. It was the relentless choreography of controlled spectacle. Every hour, synchronized drone fireworks burst overhead in carefully timed displays, illuminating the skies in Nuka red and cobalt blue bursts that spelled out rotating slogans. Holographic projections of Cappy and the newly introduced mascot, Bottle, danced across rooftops at night, cheerfully reminding visitors to stay fizzy and try every flavor. Musicians, stunt performers, and robotic entertainers moved through the plazas in elaborate parades that had taken years to perfect. Even the background music drifting from concealed speakers had been tested repeatedly by behavioral psychologists to ensure maximum emotional engagement. Reviews from the public and press bordered on worshipful. National newspapers declared Nuka-World a triumph of American engineering and the most joyous place on Earth, while competing corporations scrambled to reinterpret their own entertainment strategies as Nuka-Cola, siphoned consumers into its gleaming empire of escapism. Economists predicted that the park would reshape regional tourism for decades, and early ticket sales confirmed it. Within its first 3 months, Nuka-World welcomed nearly 4 million visitors, requiring immediate expansion to several transportation hubs, parking complexes, and auxiliary dining structures. Though the public saw only flawless execution and radiant joy, the backstage machinery was far more complex, driven by a workforce of thousands, supported by robots programmed for maintenance, crowd control, sanitation, and surveillance. Nuka-Cola had built Nuka-World to be self-regulating. If a pipe burst, bots repaired it before staff even noticed. If a guest fell ill, biometric scanners alerted med teams, equipped with stimpaks, and proprietary Nuka-Aid medical supplies, specially engineered for the park. If a child wandered off, facial recognition systems guided staff to the missing guest within minutes, soothing fears before they could sour the day's experience. This seamless orchestration reinforced the illusion that Nuka-World was the safest, happiest place in America, a feat that required constant, often invisible labor beneath the glossy surface. The park's management teams monitored every attraction from centrally located security hubs disguised as customer service centers. These hubs allowed operators to oversee animatronic performance cycles, crowd movement patterns, emergency response systems, and even beverage consumption metrics for later marketing analysis. Meanwhile, deep beneath the park's visible pathways, Nuka-Cola's R&D divisions conducted experiments using guest behavior as valuable data. Nuka-World's opening year, therefore, doubled as the first large-scale field test for robotics algorithms, automated workforce management, and flavor reaction analytics. The public remained blissfully unaware that their laughter, movements, and drink purchases were being tracked with scientific rigor. Despite the corporate surveillance, visitors reported feeling freer inside Nuka-World than anywhere else in their daily lives. The park provided a temporary suspension of reality, a place where families who struggled to afford groceries could watch their children ride radiant rocket coasters, where soldiers returning from combat zones could momentarily forget the tensions boiling overseas, and where anyone weighed down by the escalating anxieties of pre-war America could lose themselves in a candy-colored dream built from nostalgia, nationalism, and unrelenting commercialism. The park's rapid success inspired Nuka-Cola executives to push expansion even faster than originally planned. Additional sections of the world of refreshment were constructed. New flavors were developed exclusively for park distribution, and conversations began regarding a possible second Nuka-World on the West Coast. Bradburton, increasingly conflicted between his desire to cement his public legacy and his obsession with Project Cobalt's scientific breakthroughs, found himself celebrated as a national hero, a man whose creation brought happiness to millions. Yet, even during the height of Nuka-World's initial triumph, cracks existed beneath the polished veneer. Some of the robotic systems installed in the Galactic Zone exhibited signs of instability during stress testing, forcing emergency recalibrations that were never publicly disclosed. Several early incidents in Safari Adventure, involving animal animatronics malfunctioning, led to minor injuries that were quietly settled out of court. Chemical storage issues related to Nuka quantum research nearly resulted in a catastrophic contamination event before containment systems activated, prompting the R&D team to bury their operations deeper underground. Park management, eager to maintain the illusion of perfection, implemented strict internal policies, forbidding employees from discussing any malfunctions with guests, and non-disclosure agreements became mandatory for nearly every worker who had access to backstage areas. The pressure to preserve the park's image also created a strenuous environment for human staff, who were expected to maintain constant enthusiasm and adhere to rigid performance guidelines designed to prevent any break in the fantastical immersion. Still, for the vast majority of guests, the magic held. Nuka-World's first anniversary was marked by a nationwide broadcast showcasing a grand parade, new seasonal attractions, and the introduction of limited edition drinks that caused nationwide shortages as fans clamored to buy anything associated with the park. In the years that followed, Nuka-World became a cultural pilgrimage site, a place millions dreamed of visiting at least once in their lives. School children wrote essays about it, celebrities were photographed in its plazas, and advertisements featuring the park ran constantly on television, radio, and holotape. Its influence permeated American culture with startling speed. Architectural styles mimicked its retro-futuristic aesthetic. Other corporations attempted to replicate its theming strategies, and patriotic slogans began blending seamlessly with Nuka-Cola jingles. The park became so iconic that government officials leveraged its imagery to boost national morale during broadcasts about worsening resource conflicts, intertwining the brand even more deeply with American identity. As Nuka-World matured into the most beloved entertainment destination in the United States, Bradburton's dreams seemed fully realized. The park dazzled millions, sustained massive profits, and cemented Nuka-Cola's dominance over the American imagination. But its rising glory carried an ominous undercurrent. The same technologies that delighted guests were also evolving into tools of surveillance and military application. The same subterranean labs that drove innovation also birthed volatile experiments never intended for public knowledge. And the same national desperation that made the park so popular also foreshadowed a future where such comfort would become impossible. Still, in those early years, Nuka-World stood untouched by tragedy, basking in the adoration of a nation eager to believe in fantasies. It shone like a jewel amid societal collapse, a neon-lit promise that joy could be manufactured, controlled, and consumed endlessly. For a brief window of time, Nuka-World truly was America's crowning triumph, the happiest place a nation on the brink of annihilation would ever know, until the day the bombs fell and froze its smiling veneer in place forever. Long before the park became a shattered battleground of raiders, malfunctioning robots, and irradiated horrors, Nuka-World stood as the apex of pre-war American escapism, a sprawling wonderland of 6 meticulously crafted themed zones designed to overwhelm the senses, shape consumer behavior, and immerse visitors in a fantasy of color, spectacle, and corporate mythology, each land reflecting a different piece of the United States' idealized self-image, as filtered through the Nuka-Cola Corporation's hyper-stylized branding. Entering the park from the Nuka Express monorail, guests were greeted by the dazzling expanse of Nuka-Town, USA, the park's central hub and beating heart, a sanitized vision of 1,950 seconds Americana, where every corner overflowed with neon signage, spinning mascots, and gleaming storefronts selling everything from souvenir caps to limited edition Nuka-Cola flavors unavailable anywhere else. Nuka-Town, USA was designed as the park's primary social and economic engine, a place where guests wandered through wide, spotless streets lined with retro-themed diners, carnival games, and performance stages where cheerful actors and animatronic mascots reenacted wholesome fictional histories of the Nuka-Cola brand. The architecture mixed chrome futurism with nostalgic patriotism, creating an environment where every visual cue reinforced the idea that America's past had been unambiguously joyous, and that its future, at least within the park, was destined to be even brighter. Visitors filled the plazas to watch parades featuring Cappy and Bottle, cheered by costumed performers waving flags and dancing beside towering soda bottle floats that glowed with internal LED lighting. The Central Market, Fizz Top Grill, offered panoramic views of the entire park from its elevated terrace, serving gourmet versions of classic American comfort foods infused with Nuka-Cola variants that managers swore enhanced flavor perception, even though those enhancements were tied to secret ingredients the corporation refused to disclose. From this hub, guests dispersed into the park's 6 themed lands, beginning with the whimsical yet unsettling Kiddie Kingdom, a child-focused zone that blended fairy tale aesthetics with advanced robotics and chemical-based special effects. Designed to resemble a storybook carnival, Kiddie Kingdom featured castles, candy-themed rides, and cheerful animatronic entertainers programmed to interact dynamically with children. But beneath the cheerful paint, this zone concealed the earliest signs that Nuka-Cola's ambitions were not purely wholesome. Employees later testified, though their statements were buried through non-disclosure agreements, that Kiddie Kingdom was frequently used as a testing area for aerosolized compounds designed to produce mood enhancement in guests. The glowing mists that drifted across its courtyards, marketed as magical atmosphere effects, were in fact prototypes for chemical dispersal, systems intended to stimulate positive emotional responses. Children adored the area's costumed performers, but the robotics teams often struggled to keep the animatronics calibrated due to the corrosive chemicals used in the park's visual effects, resulting in frequent malfunctions that were concealed from the public through swift staff intervention. Still, most visitors remained blissfully unaware, focusing instead on the dazzling shows, spinning rides, and interactive puppet theaters that filled the zone with constant, chaotic energy. A short monorail ride away lay the Galactic Zone, the park's most technologically advanced land, and a tribute to the era's obsession with space travel and retro-futurism. Designed with heavy collaboration from Robco, the Galactic Zone featured the most advanced animatronics, security systems, and attraction designs in the park, all wrapped within a star-spangled, chrome-plated aesthetic inspired by pre-war atomic age fantasies of interplanetary exploration. Guests entered through a massive starport facade where Nuka Galaxy tour guides, sleek humanoid robots with glowing visors, ushered them toward attractions like the Nuka Galaxy roller coaster, the Starlight Interstellar Theater, and the Cosmic Comet Kids Zone. Many visitors were unaware that the robotics here were not merely for show. This entire sector doubled as a testing ground for automated combat and patrol algorithms, funded in part through Nuka-Cola's classified military research partnerships. The park's security AI, later infamous for turning the zone into a deadly trap after the bombs fell, originated here, and several of the zone's caretaker bots were designed with modular weapon ports intended for future government contracts. Yet in its prime, the zone dazzled crowds with its simulated zero-gravity chambers, laser light displays, and holographic star maps tracing fictional Nuka-themed constellations across the domed ceilings. Visitors left the Galactic Zone believing they had glimpsed the future, a future where Nuka-Cola accompanied humanity across the stars. For those seeking an escape into nature, Safari Adventure stretched across the park's northern edge, a sprawling open-air environment designed to mimic a series of exotic ecosystems filled with animatronic wildlife, robotic caretakers, and carefully curated vegetation engineered to withstand high guest traffic. Safari Adventure was marketed as both entertainment and education, with interactive exhibits teaching children about conservation, ecology, and the company's fictionalized version of global wildlife history. In reality, the zone's biological infrastructure was an elaborate front for Nuka-Cola's experimental genetic research, conducted under Project Cobalt's umbrella. The land's animal animatronics were prototypes for potential military drone adaptations, many equipped with early versions of targeting and movement algorithms. Several real animals had been imported for testing, but were quietly removed after incidents involving containment failures and unexpected behavioral mutations caused by exposure to park chemicals. Still, the public marveled at interactive safaris where holographic predators stalked animatronic prey, and families boarded the Safari Adventure Tour tram to ride through habitats filled with towering mechanical giraffes, roaring animatronic lions, and robotic birds with feather systems engineered to respond to wind sensors. Further west, Dry Rock Gulch transported visitors into a stylized version of the American frontier, drawing inspiration from cowboy myths and pre-war entertainment tropes rather than historical authenticity. This zone was unique in that it relied almost entirely on robotics to maintain immersion. Nearly every character in the area was played by an advanced animatronic performer: Sheriff Eagle, Mad Mulligan, Doc Phosphate, each equipped with sophisticated dialogue trees, gesture, routines, and combat choreography for staged stunt shows that enthralled crowds with dramatic showdowns between robotic outlaws and lawmen. Nuka-Cola intended Dry Rock Gulch as an experiment in fully automated guest engagement, and early performance reports showed that visitors were captivated by the smooth fluidity of the robot's movements, which many mistook for real humans in costume. An entire sub-level beneath the zone was dedicated to servicing these machines, with mechanics struggling constantly to keep them operational in the face of environmental dust, chemical residue from nearby attractions, and experimental firmware updates that often caused personality glitches. Yet the zone's blend of Old West charm, gunfight spectacles, and interactive quests made it one of the park's most consistently visited areas. Completing the circuit was the World of Refreshment, a zone that doubled as both a dark ride and a marketing exhibit, guiding guests on a narrated journey through the company's history, flavors, and fictionalized global impact of Nuka-Cola. This sector featured a river ride where boats floated through glowing canals laced with Nuka Quantum's signature luminescent formula, giving the water an otherworldly blue glow. The ride's animatronics reenacted key moments of the company's history, albeit through a sanitized corporate lens that omitted any mention of its more controversial research practices. Chemical storage vaults hidden in the zone held dangerous prototypes and flavor compounds, though the public saw only the cheerful Nuka-Cola family animatrons waving at them from glowing bottling lines. The World of Refreshment blurred the boundary between ride and advertisement, creating a hybrid experience that celebrated consumerism as a heroic narrative. With its glowing tunnels, holographic spokespeople, and automated drink samplers, it ensured that guests left craving more of the corporation's products, not merely as beverages, but as symbols of joy and identity. All these zones connected back to Nukatown, USA through a vast network of pathways engineered to maintain perfect crowd flow, a design achieved through heat maps, psychological modeling, and sensory manipulation intended to keep guests moving smoothly from one spending opportunity to the next. Hidden beneath those pathways lay the park's secret arteries, maintenance corridors, reinforced tunnels, underground labs, and utility systems designed for both civilian operations and classified research. This invisible infrastructure allowed the park to operate with uncanny efficiency, keeping the illusion flawless even when attractions malfunctioned or chemical leaks threatened guest safety. At its peak, Nuka-World was a marvel of engineering and illusion, a world where happiness was manufactured through robotics, chemistry, and relentless consumer messaging. Its lands represented more than entertainment. They were corporate manifestos, each one crafted to immerse visitors in carefully curated fantasies that reinforced Nuka-Cola's brand identity while subtly shaping public emotions and behaviors. Before the bombs fell, before the raiders and decay, before decades of abandonment twisted these wonders into nightmares, Nuka-World's themed lands stood as monuments to a nation enthralled by spectacle, desperate for distractions, and willing to embrace an artificial paradise built on foundations they never saw and would never have wanted to know existed. Beneath the colorful veneer of rides, neon lights, and branded happiness, Nuka-World harbored a far darker and highly secretive dimension. As the Nuka-Cola Corporation covertly transformed sections of the park into classified research and development facilities designed to push the boundaries of beverage science, chemical experimentation, and military-grade technological innovation, a dual purpose that few visitors would ever suspect during the park's glittering heyday. Hidden beneath the themed zones, in reinforced laboratories and sealed underground complexes, corporate scientists conducted experiments on new Nuka-Cola formulas, ranging from the enhancement of stimulant content to the development of quantum variants capable of extraordinary energy output, a line of research so sensitive that only a select cadre of executives and trusted engineers had knowledge of it, with strict compartmentalization to prevent leaks. Project Cobalt, one of the most ambitious of these undertakings, sought to merge beverage chemistry with pre-war tactical applications, testing irradiated compounds and experimental energy sources on automated systems, and while officially advertised as innovative product trials, internally it was treated with the highest level of secrecy, protected by armed security, biometric locks, and misleading schematics to conceal the true purpose from park personnel and government regulators alike. Corporate espionage loomed as an ever-present threat, as rival divisions within Nuka-Cola vied for technological supremacy, attempting to gain access to quantum research, proprietary formulas, and even robotic prototypes, leading to clandestine sabotage, encrypted communications, and covert surveillance that transformed the park into a battleground of industrial secrecy, almost as lethal as any physical skirmish. Laboratory corridors ran beneath attractions like Kiddie Kingdom and the Galactic Zone, allowing scientists to move undetected, monitor experiments remotely, and deploy robotic test units without drawing the attention of park guests, while redundant power grids, shielded containment units, and advanced refrigeration systems ensured that volatile chemicals and sensitive research remained operational regardless of public traffic above. Some projects even tested early prototypes of automated defense systems, intended to protect both high-value corporate assets and classified experimental zones, merging the world of amusement with militarized robotics in ways that blurred ethical and safety boundaries, as accidents were concealed and data manipulated to ensure corporate objectives were met. Internal corporate communications, memos, and security logs reveal a culture of paranoia and ruthless competition, where whistleblowers were neutralized, intelligence was closely guarded, and the pressure to innovate outpaced concern for public safety, producing an atmosphere of constant tension that coexisted alongside the joyful, carefree facade, visible to visitors. Employees were often deliberately kept in the dark about the scope of these projects, with scientists sworn to secrecy, and regular staff given plausible explanations framed as routine maintenance or experimental marketing tests, ensuring that the park's public image remained untarnished even as groundbreaking and potentially hazardous experiments unfolded beneath their feet. The presence of these secret endeavors also influenced the design of park attractions, as certain rides, tunnels, and backrooms were constructed with dual purposes in mind: entertainment above and secure R&D operations below, creating a spatial overlap that allowed research to continue undisturbed while maintaining the illusion of a fully functional amusement park. In essence, Nuka-World was not merely a theme park, but a corporate laboratory in disguise, a place where pre-war ambitions, technological experimentation, and industrial espionage coalesced under the guise of family fun, and where the pursuit of innovation, profit, and competitive advantage set the stage for both the park's enduring mystique and the latent dangers that would persist long after the bombs fell, leaving a hidden legacy of science, secrecy, and ruthless corporate maneuvering encoded into the very foundations of Nuka-World. The 23rd of October 2077 marked the final day of Nuka-World's glittering existence, a day that began under the bright promise of entertainment and corporate spectacle and ended in the catastrophic silence of nuclear annihilation, with every attraction, ride, and facility frozen in a moment of pre-war normalcy as the bombs fell and civilization as the park knew it ceased to exist. Guests arrived unaware of the looming global conflict, enjoying Kiddie Kingdom's carousel, racing through Dry Rock Gulch, and sipping on the latest Nuka-Cola Quantum releases, oblivious to the escalating international tensions that had already set the world on a path toward destruction. Behind the scenes, operators, engineers, and security personnel continued routine maintenance, unaware that the meticulous systems designed to maintain amusement, order, and secrecy would soon become irrelevant, as the first nuclear detonations triggered a cascade of panic, confusion, and instant casualties both inside and outside the park, leaving employees with no means to warn the thousands of visitors in time. The park's automated systems, rides, animatronics, robotic mascots, and NIRA service units continued functioning in isolated pockets even as external infrastructure failed, electricity flickered, and communication lines went silent, creating surreal scenarios in which brightly lit attractions and cheerful robotic figures operated without human oversight, an eerie juxtaposition against the global devastation unfolding beyond the park's fences. Fallout shelters, staff-only bunkers, and security posts designed for minor emergencies proved woefully inadequate against the scale of nuclear bombardment, with only a handful of staff surviving initial blasts, and even these survivors faced exposure to lethal radiation, crumbling infrastructure, and collapsing buildings as the park's structures absorbed shockwaves and firestorms. Outside the gates, entire cities and industrial complexes were reduced to ash. And while Nuka-World's reinforced buildings provided marginally better protection than ordinary pre-war structures, the combination of fire, radiation, and structural failure left the park in partial ruin almost immediately, scattering any remaining human life and leaving the once bustling zones of Nuka Town, USA, Safari Adventure, and the Galactic Zone eerily silent. Guest records, payroll logs, and security footage from the final day reveal a spectrum of human responses. Some visitors sought shelter in reinforced areas, others attempted to flee via parking lots or service tunnels, while a few remained oblivious, enjoying attractions until destroyed by the initial blast, or trapped in collapsing structures. These fragmented moments illustrate both the park's failure as a protective environment and the tragic innocence of a society unprepared for nuclear war. The quantum laboratories, hidden research areas, and Project Cobalt facilities, already secretive, became inaccessible and largely destroyed, with chemical and experimental materials compromised, leaving behind remnants that would slowly leach into the environment and pose hazards for centuries, while the surviving robotics continued limited operation, adding to the surreal post-apocalyptic tableau. By the end of the day, Nuka-World, America's crown jewel of amusement, had ceased to exist as a functioning entity, reduced to a combination of partially operating machinery, irradiated ruins, and scattered human remains, marking the park not only as a victim of global catastrophe, but as a haunting monument to pre-war excess and corporate ambition, frozen at the moment when innocence and spectacle collided violently with the indiscriminate devastation of the Great War. In the silence that followed, automated systems gradually failed, structures crumbled under neglect, and the once bright realms of imagination, thrill, and adventure transformed into a bleak, irradiated landscape, setting the stage for the centuries of abandonment, mutation, and raider occupation that would define Nuka-World's post-apocalyptic history. In the centuries following the Great War, Nuka-World transformed from a vibrant symbol of pre-war Americana into a haunting landscape of decay, radiation, and mutation. Its once celebrated rides, attractions, and corporate installations succumbing to neglect, environmental collapse, and the relentless passage of time, leaving behind a park that was simultaneously recognizable and alien to anyone who had known it in its prime. Buildings crumbled as foundations weakened, steel supports rusted, and concrete fractured under the dual pressures of seismic aftershocks and decades of weathering, while roofs caved in and glass windows shattered, creating labyrinthine ruins that both concealed and revealed the skeletal remains of pre-war architecture. The irradiated soil facilitated the growth of mutated flora, with fast-spreading weeds, vines, and toxic plants overtaking once manicured lawns, pathways, and themed zones, while pockets of radioactive contamination made entire sections of the Ether Park uninhabitable without careful navigation or protective gear, transforming areas that were once joyful and family-friendly into dangerous, unpredictable terrain. Malfunctioning robotics, left to their own devices after the sudden cessation of human oversight, continued to operate intermittently. Animatronic mascots flickered between programmed greetings and erratic movements. N-I-R-A. Units patrolled empty pathways, and partially functioning rides occasionally lurched to life, creating an eerie environment in which the familiar sounds and sights of amusement were juxtaposed with the absence of human presence, amplifying the psychological impact on any survivor or scavenger who entered the park. Wildlife, both native and introduced for attractions such as safari adventure, adapted to the irradiated environment and proliferated unchecked, producing aggressive, mutated creatures that dominated formerly safe zones, while ghouls, former park employees, and visitors twisted by radiation exposure roamed the park in tormented packs, their presence a constant reminder of the human cost of the Great War and the perils of the wasteland. Zones such as the Galactic Zone and Kiddie Kingdom decayed differently, reflecting the materials, designs, and environmental stresses unique to each area. Metallic structures corroded under persistent exposure to radiation and moisture, synthetic materials cracked or discolored, and electrical systems failed, leaving once brilliant displays dark, silent, and dangerous. In some cases, residual power allowed pockets of activity that both fascinated and threatened scavengers. From spinning ride components to flickering neon lights and malfunctioning security bots, water systems stagnated or collapsed entirely, contaminating pools, fountains, and artificial streams, while food service areas became hazardous due to spoiled or irradiated supplies, forcing early raiders and explorers to rely on scavenged pre-war caches, foraging, or hunting mutated fauna, further shaping the survival strategies that would define later occupation of the park. The environmental transformations also created unique hazards. Collapsing structures, unstable terrain, irradiated soil, and overgrown vegetation combined to make movement through Nuka-World a constant test of agility, observation, and caution. While the psychological weight of traversing spaces that once hosted laughter, joy, and innocence left lingering trauma for anyone who survived encounters with ghouls, aggressive wildlife, or malfunctioning machines. Over the decades, the park's decay also reshaped the social and tactical dynamics of those who dared to inhabit it, forcing early raiders, scavengers, and explorers to establish safe zones, claim defensible positions, and develop an intimate understanding of the park's altered geography, hazards, and resources. Former attractions became natural fortresses, while collapsed rides and tunnels provided shelter or ambush points, demonstrating the interplay between environmental collapse and human ingenuity. By the end of this period, Nuka-World had evolved into a post-apocalyptic ecosystem in which radiation, mutation, and the residual legacy of human engineering intertwined, creating a unique, dangerous, and unpredictable environment that preserved the memory of pre-war excess while simultaneously asserting the power of nature, neglect, and time over even the most sophisticated and carefully constructed amusement park, setting the stage for the eventual rise of raider factions and the violent reclamation of the park by human survivors who would adapt its ruins for their own purposes. In the decades following the Great War, Nuka-World, with its sprawling infrastructure, isolated location, and abundance of residual resources, became a magnet for survivors, scavengers, and opportunistic raider groups, whose arrival transformed the abandoned amusement park into a contested territory where human ingenuity, violence, and desperation collided to establish the first post-war settlements and social hierarchies. Initially, small bands of scavengers moved cautiously through irradiated zones, navigating the collapsed rides, overgrown pathways, and malfunctioning robots to locate safe shelter, food, and water, often using derelict buildings, such as staff offices, warehouses, and partially intact attractions as temporary bases, while avoiding irradiated wildlife and aggressive ghouls that had already adapted to the park's altered ecosystem. These early arrivals quickly discovered that the park's pre-war design inadvertently provided strategic advantages for those willing to exploit it. Elevated roller coaster tracks offered observation points. Service tunnels connected multiple zones while avoiding hazardous surface areas, and partially operational security systems could be repurposed to monitor and control territory, giving cunning groups the ability to dominate weaker bands or fend off intruders. Conflicts between scavenger groups were almost immediate, as resources proved scarce, and the park's enclosed layout intensified competition. Minor disputes over food caches, water filtration units, and safe sleeping quarters escalated into violent skirmishes, setting the precedent for the raider culture that would later define Nuka-World, in which strength, territorial knowledge, and ruthlessness determined survival and status. Over time, some groups began to coalesce into more organized factions, developing rudimentary leadership structures, assigning roles for scouting, defense, and resource gathering, and using intimidation, spectacle, all ritualized, violence to enforce internal cohesion, often drawing inspiration, consciously or unconsciously, from the park's thematic design. The operators gravitated toward areas with intact buildings and corporate aesthetics. The disciples embraced zones with dramatic, theatrical settings for ritualistic behavior, and early iterations of the pack favored open, sensory-intensive spaces conducive to displays of aggression and mobility. Early settlement patterns also reflected environmental constraints. Irradiated zones, collapsed infrastructure, and malfunctioning robotics influenced where groups could safely inhabit, while the spread of mutated flora and aggressive fauna dictated patrol routes, ambush points, and scavenging strategies, leading to an emergent territorial map that would form the foundation of raider control for decades. Interaction with the residual automated systems further shaped the raiders' early experiences. Some scavengers learned to repair, disable, or weaponize animatronics and service robots, incorporating them into defenses or raids, while others fell victim to malfunctioning machines, reinforcing the duality of technology as both a tool and a hazard. As these early raider settlements solidified, patterns of alliance, rivalry, and resource control began to emerge, with certain groups exerting dominance through displays of violence, control of critical infrastructure, or symbolic manipulation of the park's attractions, effectively transforming Nuka-World into a microcosm of power politics, where territory and resources were inseparable from reputation and authority. By the end of this formative period, the park had shifted from abandoned ruin to a nascent raider stronghold. Factions with distinct identities, survival strategies, and territorial claims had begun to take root, setting the stage for the rise of the established gangs, the operators, the disciples, and the pack, and cementing Nuka-World's reputation as a place where only the ruthless, cunning, and adaptable could thrive, marking the beginning of a violent chapter in the park's post-war history that would endure for generations. By the time human factions had begun to consolidate control over Nuka-World, 3 dominant raider gangs had emerged, each occupying distinct zones of the park, shaping its post-war social landscape and embodying unique ideologies, leadership structures, and combat styles that reflected both environmental adaptation and the lingering influence of the park's pre-war design. The operators, occupying the central and structurally secure areas of Nuka-Town, USA, prioritized order, status, and spectacle, transforming intact corporate offices, warehouses, and elevated viewing platforms into fortified headquarters, where leadership exercised authority through intimidation, resource control, and strategic use of residual technology such as partially operational animatronics or surveillance systems. Their aesthetic reflected corporate pre-war values, with members adopting flamboyant attire, insignia, and rituals that reinforced hierarchy and obedience, and their approach to combat and raiding emphasized precision, planning, and psychological dominance, often using fear and spectacle as weapons against both rivals and subordinates. The disciples, in contrast, took root in zones that lent themselves to theatricality, ritual, and extreme sensory influence, including sections of Kiddie Kingdom, Galactic Zone, and themed attractions with exaggerated or macabre elements. They developed a cult-like hierarchy, blending ceremonial practices, extreme violence, and public displays of punishment to enforce loyalty and instill terror, their ideology merging reverence for chaos, pain, and spectacle with practical strategies for domination, resulting in a faction whose combat style combined unpredictability, aggression, and ritualized violence that was as much psychological warfare as it was physical. The Pack, a faction defined by savagery, mobility, and a survival of the fittest ethos, inhabited high-energy, chaotic areas such as the Galactic Zone and open park grounds, where the overstimulation of rides, bright lights, and sensory overload shaped their feral culture. Pack members organized around dominance hierarchies, determined by strength, cunning, and daring feats, prioritizing speed, ambush tactics, and ferocious assaults in both inter-faction conflicts and predatory raids, turning the park's stimulating environment into a strategic advantage that emphasized agility, improvisation, and the exploitation of environmental hazards. Each gang claimed and fortified territories that aligned with their cultural and tactical tendencies, using both natural and pre-existing park features to control choke points, access to resources, and defensive positions. Operators monopolized structurally sound buildings and critical supply caches. The disciples dominated zones conducive to intimidation and ceremonial performance, and the pack exploited sensory-intensive areas to maintain unpredictability and enforce group cohesion through spectacle and fear. Beyond territorial control, each faction developed intricate social hierarchies, enforcing loyalty through rewards, punishment, and ritualized recognition of skill or bravery, while managing resource allocation and strategic decision-making to maintain dominance. These internal structures reflected a balance between pragmatism and ideology, ensuring survival in a landscape of scarcity, radiation, and mutated threats. Inter-faction conflicts were frequent and often brutal, ranging from skirmishes over water and Nuka-Cola stockpiles to clashes orchestrated as tests of dominance or psychological warfare. Yet alliances and temporary truces emerged when mutual benefit, territorial defense, or resource scarcity dictated cooperation, creating a dynamic and constantly shifting social ecosystem within the park. The gang's identities and operations were inextricably linked to Nuka-World's pre-war architecture and technology. The park's thematic zones, rides, and robotics informed combat strategies, cultural norms, and psychological influence, ensuring that even in the absence of their original function, these elements shaped human behavior and factional development. By the time the park was fully occupied by raider factions, Nuka Town had transformed from abandoned amusement infrastructure into a microcosm of human ingenuity, brutality, and social organization, with the operators, disciples, and pack embodying distinct philosophies, survival strategies, and aesthetic codes that would define the park's post-war identity and provide the foundation for the Overboss system, internal contests, and eventual external interactions with the wider Commonwealth. Under the iron-fisted rule of Overboss Colter, Nuka-World transformed from a collection of loosely organized raider factions into a brutally unified society governed by fear, spectacle, and strict hierarchies, with Colter asserting absolute authority over the operators, disciples, and pack while reshaping the park's chaotic ruins into a controlled theater of power where every action reinforced his dominance. Recognizing that survival and obedience depended on both strength and psychological manipulation, Colter instituted the Gauntlet, a deadly, ritualized trial designed to test new raiders, punish the disloyal, and maintain a constant display of his supremacy. The course integrated the park's decaying attractions, roller coaster tracks, and sensory-overloaded zones into a labyrinth of lethal obstacles, forcing participants to confront not only rival raiders and automated threats, but also environmental hazards that turned the once celebratory amusement areas into instruments of terror. Colter centralized control of critical resources, including Nuka-Cola stockpiles, ammunition, water purification systems, and functional robotics, ensuring that loyalty was rewarded with access and privilege while dissenters faced brutal consequences, reinforcing the perception that survival and prosperity were contingent upon submission to his authority. Each faction retained aspects of its identity under Colter's reign, but all were subordinated to the Overboss's command, with territories reorganized to maximize strategic advantage, patrol routes standardized to enforce order, and inter-faction rivalries channeled into sanctioned challenges that strengthened cohesion while preventing unsanctioned uprisings. The gauntlet itself functioned as both a practical tool and a symbolic spectacle. New recruits were forced to navigate deadly environments, survive combat against trained raiders, and demonstrate loyalty under extreme stress, while observers, including seasoned faction members, internalized the Overboss's power through the ritualized violence, fear, and spectacle on display, creating a culture in which obedience, skill, and ruthlessness were continuously measured and rewarded. Colter also exploited the park's technological remnants, repurposing partially functional animatronics, security robots, and environmental hazards as extensions of his authority, making automated systems both instruments of control and psychological weapons, reinforcing the notion that resistance was not only dangerous, but futile. Beyond maintaining internal cohesion, Colter leveraged his power to expand the park's influence, orchestrating raids into contested zones, securing resource-rich areas, and ensuring that the park's hierarchy, infrastructure, and spectacle served his broader goals of dominance, territorial expansion, and the perpetuation of fear as a governing principle. Challenges to his authority, whether from ambitious raiders or factional disputes, were swiftly neutralized through execution, forced participation in the gauntlet, or strategic intimidation, ensuring that the social order remained unchallenged while demonstrating that power in Nuka-World was inseparable from both violence and perception. Under Colter's reign, the park became a theater in which governance, survival, and spectacle were inseparably intertwined. The blood-soaked rituals of the gauntlet, the centralized control of resources, and the repurposing of attractions for intimidation all reinforced a culture in which loyalty was mandatory, strength determined status, and the Overboss's authority remained absolute, leaving a legacy that would shape the political and social structure of Nuka-World long after his eventual downfall. The entry of the sole survivor into Nuka-World marked a pivotal moment in the park's post-war history, introducing an external force capable of disrupting the entrenched hierarchy of raider factions, challenging Overboss Colter's authority, and redefining the balance of power within a territory long dominated by fear, ritual, and brutal spectacle. Forced through the gauntlet as part of the Overboss's initiation and test of skill, the sole survivor navigated a treacherous gauntlet of hazards, from booby-trapped rides and malfunctioning animatronics to direct combat against trained raiders, while simultaneously contending with environmental dangers including collapsed structures, irradiated zones, and unpredictable mutated wildlife, all of which transformed the park's attractions into instruments of lethal trial rather than amusement. As the survivor advanced, their actions were closely observed by faction members, who interpreted each success or failure as evidence of relative strength, courage, and tactical acumen, reinforcing the gauntlet's dual purpose as both a means of survival and a psychological tool for evaluating the threat and potential of newcomers. Confrontation with Colter was inevitable, as the Overboss sought to eliminate any challenger to his authority and maintain the perception of invincibility that underpinned the park's social order. The ensuing battle, conducted amid the ruins and attractions of Nuka-World, demonstrated the survivor's ability to exploit both environmental features and tactical ingenuity, navigating choke points, using cover, and turning the park's machinery and hazards against their opponents in a manner that no raider had previously mastered. With Colter's defeat, the sole survivor assumed the mantle of Overboss, instantly inheriting control over the operators, disciples, and pack, as well as the centralized command over resources, territory, and the gauntlet itself. This abrupt shift in power forced raider factions to reassess loyalties, adjust internal hierarchies, and redefine inter-faction relations under the guidance of a leader whose philosophy, objectives, and methods diverged from those of their predecessors. The survivors' rise was not only a personal victory but a systemic upheaval, as the gauntlet of fear, ritual, and spectacle that had maintained Colter's dominance was now leveraged under new leadership, offering the potential to either reinforce existing raider culture or dismantle it entirely, depending on choices made during consolidation of power. Immediate consequences included the reorganization of faction territories, redistribution of resources, and potential changes in the operational strategies of each gang, as the survivors' decisions regarding punishment, reward, and integration shaped both internal cohesion and long-term stability. Beyond political control, the sole survivor's presence symbolized a broader narrative of agency, choice, and influence in a post-apocalyptic world, demonstrating that individual action could redefine centuries of entrenched social order. Even within the lethal and complex environment of Nuka-World, where survival had historically been dictated by strength, cunning, and adherence to ritualized systems of power. The arrival of the sole survivor thus represents not only a turning point in the history of Nuka-World, but also an emblematic case study in the dynamics of authority, adaptation, and human influence in a hostile, post-war environment, showing how a single actor could navigate, challenge, and ultimately reshape a society forged in violence, scarcity, and spectacle. Following the defeat of Overboss Colter, the sole survivor faced the monumental task of reclaiming Nuka-World from the chaos of entrenched factional control, irradiated hazards, and lingering threats from mutated wildlife and malfunctioning pre-war robotics, executing a zone-by-zone campaign to purge the park of dangers, while re-establishing infrastructure and consolidating authority over the operators, disciples, and pack. Each of the park's main zones presented unique challenges. Nuka Town, USA required clearing the heart of raider political power and securing critical supply caches, while Kiddie Kingdom's labyrinthine rides, crumbling structures, and trapped animatronics forced careful navigation and tactical ingenuity. The Galactic Zone's sensory-overloaded environment complicated combat, demanding adaptive strategies to overcome both environmental hazards and aggressive raider patrols, while Dry Rock Gulch's decayed Western-themed attractions served as natural choke points for ambushes and resource control. The battle to reclaim each zone was not solely a matter of physical dominance. The survivor had to dismantle entrenched raider leadership, neutralize rogue automatons, and deal with irradiated ghouls that patrolled key pathways, creating a complex interplay between environmental mastery, combat skill, and strategic decision-making. Pre-war technology, once intended for amusement and corporate spectacle, became both a tool and an obstacle. Roller coaster tracks, automated rides, and security systems could be exploited to funnel enemies, create defensive positions, or disrupt raider formations, while also posing lethal risks if mismanaged, reflecting the enduring duality of Nuka-World's design as both a playground and a battlefield. Reclaiming zones also involved securing critical resources to sustain further operations, including stockpiles of Nuka-Cola, ammunition caches, and functional robotics, which were often fiercely contested by remaining raider factions and scavengers. Strategic management of these supplies reinforced the survivors' authority and ensured the sustainability of their campaign. In addition to military and logistical challenges, psychological warfare played a significant role, clearing the park visibly of threats and restoring operational symbols, such as repaired signage, functioning attractions, and organized patrols, demonstrated the survivors' power, reshaping the perception of authority among raiders and stabilizing control over newly reclaimed areas. The campaign was conducted sequentially but interconnectedly, with each zone's liberation providing staging points, intelligence, and material support for the next, reflecting a calculated approach that balanced immediate tactical objectives with long-term operational strategy. Environmental hazards, radiation spikes, structural collapse, and unpredictable wildlife remained constant threats, requiring adaptive problem-solving, use of pre-existing fortifications, and exploitation of terrain advantages, emphasizing the survivors' ability to turn Nuka-World's dangers into tactical opportunities. By systematically purging radiation, malfunctioning robots, ghouls, and hostile raiders from each area, the survivor re-established control over Nuka-World's critical infrastructure, reopened essential pathways, and demonstrated authority over all three gangs, creating a foundation for either cooperative governance or continued factional manipulation. Ultimately, the battle to reclaim Nuka-World transformed the park from a fragmented, anarchic landscape into a consolidated domain under a single, decisive authority, where environmental mastery, strategic planning, and adaptive combat merged to reshape both the physical and social architecture of the post-apocalyptic amusement park, illustrating the survivors' capacity to impose order upon chaos and redefine the power dynamics that had ruled Nuka-World for decades. With the sole survivor now established as Overboss, Nuka-World entered a precarious period in which the balance of power between the three dominant raider factions, the Operators, Disciples, and Pack, was tested through both subtle political maneuvering and overt acts of violence, creating a tense and dynamic environment in which loyalty, ambition, and strategy determined the park's future. Each faction, while nominally under the survivors' command, retained its cultural identity, leadership structures, and territorial claims, creating latent friction that could erupt into open conflict, depending on the Overboss's decisions regarding rewards, punishments, and the distribution of critical resources, such as Nuka-Cola stockpiles, weapon caches, and fortified positions. The Operators, accustomed to hierarchical control and displays of authority, often pushed for centralized governance and the reinforcement of structured patrols, leveraging their technological acumen and strategic positions within Nuka-Town, USA, to influence the distribution of power and enforce compliance among rival factions. The Disciples, with their cult-like devotion to ritual and spectacle, interpreted the survivors' authority through the lens of ceremonial recognition, expecting opportunities to demonstrate loyalty through public acts of violence, participation in sanctioned punishments, and control over zones suited for theatrical intimidation, while challenging decisions that appeared to undermine their ideological dominance or ritual prerogatives. The Pack, valuing strength, mobility, and aggressive dominance, continuously tested the boundaries of obedience, conducting raids, displays of ferocity, and territorial expansion that both asserted internal status and challenged the authority of the other factions, requiring the survivor to act decisively to maintain balance and prevent internecine warfare from destabilizing the entire park. These tensions were further complicated by the park's fractured geography and environmental hazards, overgrown zones, collapsed structures, and malfunctioning automated systems created natural choke points and ambush sites, allowing factions to stage surprise attacks or assert dominance over contested areas, while forcing the overboss to carefully consider the placement of patrols, the timing of confrontations, and the potential consequences of favoritism. Decisions regarding factional reward and punishment became a central mechanism for managing these power dynamics, with the survivor able to consolidate authority by rewarding loyalty, redistributing resources, or strategically neutralizing ambitious leaders, or alternatively, to dismantle the existing raider hierarchy by suppressing one faction, thereby reshaping the social and political landscape of Nuka-Town. Inter-faction warfare, whether subtle acts of sabotage, orchestrated duels, or large-scale raids, served both as a demonstration of strength and as a test of the survivor's ability to enforce order, highlighting the delicate equilibrium between coercion, negotiation, and opportunistic alliances that characterized post-war governance within the park. These struggles also reinforced the symbolic and psychological dimensions of authority, as visible demonstrations of power, control of critical zones, and strategic manipulation of the gauntlet-shaped perception instilled fear and influenced behavior across the park's population, ensuring that the overboss's reputation remained a decisive factor in factional compliance. Ultimately, the power struggle over Nuka-Town was more than a contest of brute force. It represented a complex negotiation of culture, ideology, and survival within the irradiated remnants of an amusement park, where the decisions of a single individual, the sole survivor, could determine whether the raider factions maintained equilibrium, descended into chaos, or were permanently restructured, leaving a lasting imprint on the social, political, and psychological fabric of post-war Nuka-World. With control of Nuka-World firmly in the hands of the sole survivor, the park became the launching point for a broader campaign of expansion into the surrounding Commonwealth, as the Overboss extended raider influence through the establishment of fortified outposts, coercive recruitment, and strategic subjugation of local settlements, effectively transforming Nuka-World from an isolated stronghold into a regional power capable of challenging established factions and asserting dominance across multiple territories. Each outpost was carefully positioned to control vital trade routes, water sources, and resource nodes, allowing raiders to project power while maintaining supply lines back to the park. These bases were heavily fortified, incorporating salvaged pre-war structures, repurposed robotics, and environmental hazards, ensuring both defensibility and intimidation, while serving as staging grounds for raids and enforcement of the Overboss's authority over the Commonwealth's scattered populations. The expansion campaign relied on a combination of military force, psychological intimidation, and political manipulation. Settlements were either coerced into submission through threats, displays of violence, and symbolic terror drawn from Nuka-World's spectacle, or persuaded to join voluntarily through promises of protection, trade, and access to resources, reflecting the complex interplay between fear and incentive in post-war governance. Encounters with major factions, the Brotherhood of Steel, the Railroad, and the Minutemen, required strategic diplomacy, opportunistic raids, or tactical avoidance, depending on the overboss's objectives, local strength, and the potential consequences of direct confrontation. These interactions shaped the broader political landscape of the region, creating a delicate balance between expansion, alliance, and provocation, with the risk that miscalculation could trigger wider conflict. Raider recruitment emphasized both coercion and social engineering, with captives or vulnerable communities trained, indoctrinated, and assimilated into the hierarchy of the park's gangs, ensuring that each new member internalized the cultural values, obedience, and combat strategies essential for sustaining Nuka-World's growing dominion. Symbolic acts, ritualized initiation, and forced labor reinforced loyalty while simultaneously spreading the park's aesthetic, ideology, and reputation of fear into the Commonwealth. Logistical challenges of expansion were immense, securing supply lines, maintaining communication, defending outposts against environmental hazards and local resistance, and integrating diverse populations required careful planning and constant vigilance, highlighting the survivors' capacity for both strategic foresight and tactical flexibility. By projecting Nuka-World's influence outward, the Overboss reshaped the regional power dynamics of the Commonwealth, transforming a once isolated amusement park into a nucleus of post-war authority, where raider culture, organizational structure, and the legacy of spectacle dictated not only the conduct of violence, but also the mechanisms of governance, resource control, and social engineering across a broader landscape. This period of expansion reinforced the duality of Nuka-World as both a cultural symbol and a military political power, demonstrating that the ambitions of a single actor, supported by disciplined enforcement, strategic infrastructure, and psychological manipulation, could extend the park's reach far beyond its original geographic and conceptual boundaries, influencing the fate of countless settlements, factions, and individuals throughout the irradiated Commonwealth. Nuka-World's enduring significance extends far beyond its status as a mere amusement park, evolving into a symbol of pre-war excess, corporate ambition, and post-war adaptation, whose ruins and cultural residues continue to shape the political, social, and psychological landscape of the Commonwealth, offering a unique lens through which to understand human behavior, resilience, and the consequences of unrestrained technological and commercial ambition in a post-apocalyptic world. Initially conceived as the pinnacle of corporate entertainment, Nuka-World embodied the convergence of spectacle, branding, and technological ingenuity, leaving behind architectural, mechanical, and symbolic markers that, centuries later, informed how survivors, raider factions, and scavengers navigated, interpreted, and repurposed the park for survival and governance. Every neon sign, roller coaster, and animatronic mascot became both a tool and a warning, shaping the strategies and identities of those who entered its irradiated confines. The park's post-war occupation by raider factions, and later by the sole survivor, demonstrates the durability of social hierarchies and cultural adaptation, showing how human groups can impose structure, ideology, and governance even upon spaces originally designed solely for entertainment, and how fear, ritual, and spectacle can be repurposed to maintain control, enforce obedience, and facilitate resource management in a chaotic and dangerous environment. On a broader level, Nuka-World illustrates the complex interplay between pre-war corporate power and post-war necessity, revealing how technology, infrastructure, and cultural artifacts outlast their intended purposes and influence human behavior long after the society that created them has vanished. The park's design, marketing, and embedded systems provided both opportunities and challenges for those attempting to assert dominance, highlighting the ways in which physical space and historical legacy shape social and political outcomes. Environmental and ecological consequences of the park's abandonment further contribute to its legacy, as radiation, mutated flora and fauna, and failing technology created a unique post-apocalyptic ecosystem that demanded ingenuity, adaptability, and strategic planning from any who sought to survive or exploit its resources, reinforcing the inextricable link between human ambition and the unforgiving realities of the irradiated landscape. Psychologically, the park serves as a testament to the enduring influence of spectacle and narrative, with its symbols, attractions, and historical mythos shaping human perception, behavior, and decision-making long after its opening day. The gauntlet, raider rituals, and pre-war branding collectively created a cultural memory that continues to inform loyalty, fear, and identity among survivors, illustrating the persistent power of narrative and symbolism in the post-war environment. In historical terms, Nuka-World functions as both cautionary tale and case study. It embodies the consequences of corporate hubris, the fragility of social and technological systems under catastrophic conditions, and the capacity of human groups to adapt, restructure, and impose order in extreme circumstances, offering insight into the ways culture, commerce, and conflict intertwine across generations. Its influence extends into the wider Commonwealth, affecting interactions with factions such as the Minutemen, Brotherhood of Steel, and Railroad, whose responses to raider expansion, territorial consolidation, and social engineering reveal how localized power can ripple outward, altering the political and military landscape across vast distances. Ultimately, the legacy of Nuka-World is one of duality. It stands simultaneously as a monument to pre-war indulgence, corporate spectacle, and technological prowess, and as a crucible in which post-war human ingenuity, ruthlessness, and adaptability are tested and demonstrated, showing that even in the most extreme circumstances, the echoes of past society continue to shape the decisions, culture, and survival of those who inherit its ruins. The park's story, frozen in its neon-lit decay, violent rituals, and repurposed infrastructure, remains a living testament to the interplay of power, culture, and human resilience, and underscores the profound and lasting impact of a single site on the collective memory, social structures, and political trajectories of post-war America.